So,
Hey guys, it's Finn. Yo yo yo. And this is my fourth year portfolio from last year when I was in the unit at the Bartlett PG 25 in the master's program. Um, my project was called The Catford Commons, Redomesticating Elmwood Farm. So all of my unit last year was given the site of Catford, which is in South London. And just to summarize the project, my project was like an alternate proposal for the redevelopment of this area of London. So there's a proposed development in Catford, and my project is a counter development. And what it does is it takes these horses that are getting retired from a nearby police station and treats them as the sole inhabitants of the site. So it's like a hypothetical approach to development where you're sort of taking a non-human or non-anthropocentric view to city development. Uh, yeah, so it's a mixed-use space as the program. There's a sort of critique baked into it of sort of like class and access to green space within cities, and I'm using the horse conceptually as a tool for generating architectural language and also spatial thinking. So as I mentioned, my portfolio starts with the site, which is a very basic site plan, just outlining that this area here is the thing I'm kind of hijacking as my redevelopment. This used to be a farm building and sort of pasture, and then it became this Victorian manor house, and then it became a constitutional club, so quite like a conservative club, and then now it became a sort of pub for the community, but it's fallen into disrepair. So my project seeks to re-establish this building as a farmhouse, and also the lands it has as sort of pasture. The area, Catford, has like this specific relationship with horses, where there was these riots that happened in the 70s. I think it was the 70s. I haven't looked at this portfolio for a while, and it was the first instance of horses being used as like riot control, and that riot set a precedent for how horses then became used as like sort of protest mitigations, like strategies and like different police enforcement strategies. So there's a large police horse station just beside the site essentially, and this sort of led me to research about horses and class in general and how throughout history they've been extremely pivotal in shaping our relationship with landscape, but also with sort of each other, because the horse kind of allowed for a new set of distances and spatial relationships when it was domesticated. Yeah, so essentially this portion of my portfolio is all looking at researching these kinds of relationships and also different types of people and cultures who relate to horses and who rely on horses in specific ways. And a lot of my theoretical research last year, my history and theory essay, was to do with the idea of domestication, like domestication generally, and looking at what that word might mean in an architectural context. So essentially, what I found out, or what my research led to, was that the process of domestication is not only about changing an animal, but it's actually a process by which we change our society. So, and the technologies or architectures that interface between us and animals are what facilitate this domesticating process, but which also shape how our society then responds to this post-domesticated condition, which sounds like a lot of words, and it is. But yeah, it was just an interesting thing to sort of write about and think about philosophically, etc. So this part of my portfolio is just sort of explaining all that research and looking at the saddle and the stirrup as these modes of interface between us and the horse, and thinking about how those things start becoming tools for understanding, these specific technologies become a lens through which we can then understand our relationship to horses and by extension nature, because these technologies sit at our interface between these things. But in all reality, I just wanted to make a cool building with horses. So this is a room which I started by designing after looking at the saddle and the stirrup, and also by reading various sort of pieces of writing about how you should train horses and how you should like interact with them. And one passage of that book said that it's favorable if horses and humans eat together, like it's favorable for like a horse behavioral standpoint. So I wanted to design this space initially where I just took that very simple concept of thinking about what that might imply with regards to the program of the pub building or the sort of public space, and how I might integrate that with these principles that the horse training manuals taught me. And then from the sort of technical side of the project, the technical ambition was to think about how the process of retraining these retired police horses can become integrated with the process of constructing the building and constructing the space, and how somehow by integrating these two processes, you start to foster a new relationship with both the site and the horses, and then, by extension, foster a new sense of community. So I designed a stable space, again, like thinking and sort of retaining all of these principles I brought through the research. This was like my first like proper building, which I made within the project, and this is a farrier's. So for those of you who don't know, a farrier is the sort of blacksmith who works on horseshoes, making horseshoes and putting them on the horses. So I was trying to think about how that sort of character would fit in within the broader community, but then also on a more technical standpoint, I was looking at how depictions of the countryside and the picturesque within England could start informing my design in a way that kind of subverts the typical city development process. If you look at like how cities are typically developed and the type of visuals they use, I think it's a really interesting way of understanding what it is developers have in mind when they're trying to sell an idea to a community. So you sort of, I think in some ways my project was trying to subvert how you represent a project, and how that then affects the development itself. So going through plan iterations, and again, like a lot of the process of this project for me was really generating the image, and sort of basing the design around an understanding of the picturesque and the horse and the human within the landscape. I'm going to flick through this portfolio. I think a lot of the important parts for this project for me were how the development which I have starts to then touch the existing landscape, and how this whatever I'm making becomes a thing which starts to involve the entire community and also sort of bring it in. And there were loads of discussions within the technical report and within sort of the design process about how we understand green space within developments, and how if you look at green space typically in a lot of these brand new urban developments, they're kind of just there as lip service, like they exist, but I almost never see people using these tiny patches of grass that exist to fill the quota that the planning system requires. So it's interesting, I think, using the horse as like a primary inhabitant for the site. It was a way of trying to rethink how we approach green space and how you make it like a usable thing that people actually want to engage in, and also like it becomes a forum for community making, essentially. Blah 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 blah. I mean, this is all just kind of fun stuff. Like, I think the thing to understand if you're an architecture student is you have to do the research, but it's also important that you enjoy your project and just do things that you think are good and cool. And I mean, it's funny because my project this year is a lot more grounded and realistic. But last year, I think it was just important for me to build a set of skills and languages and approaches to the image, and sort of technical thinking etc. And I think what really fascinates me is sort of blurring that line between there's like a believability and a really the structural system is really fleshed out, but also there is an element of kind of magic within the project, which is conveyed through the images and also through just the concept of the project. So I actually think a lot of these images that are like more cartoony were developed for the technical report that I did last year, which was part of like one of the modules that we had to do. So I had to do images like this to show ventilation strategies and structural strategies, etc. I was looking at sort of typical buildings or historical buildings where people lived with animals and used that as an environmental strategy for thinking about heating and these sorts of things. There was also a social strategy, and I thought a lot about how, I mean, obviously this is an imaginative project, but I really wanted to be sort of realistic with like how could this actually happen, and a lot of that came down to what sort of systems or land trusts would be needed to ensure that this type of development would happen, as in, so how would it be possible to have the horses be the sole owners or beneficiaries of the site? So there are systems in place where hypothetically this could be possible. And then we get into the final renders. So horse eye view. This was kind of a funny last minute decision where I just took a view because horses can see like almost 360 degrees. So I wanted to see what that might look like as a render. And it's kind of it's a bit wacky, but it's pretty cool. A final sort of rendered section looking at this sort of community space, but also pub and a few like living spaces and housing units. Final plan. I really don't like my final plan. I mean, it's very like easy. It's like a very simple like plan. Just a little bit of a close up looking at some of the interior spaces. It's fine. It's like not a bad plan, but it's also not the most complex thing I've ever done. And like a really, really bad section. And then final renders. So this is outside of my site, but you're kind of looking at the entrance to it, and you see how it starts to touch the existing buildings and integrate them into the green space. I hate this render. This is like the interior of the pub. You know, I thought these renders were much better than I don't know. They're fine, but yeah, cool renders. This is my favorite one. I like a nice nighttime render. And yeah, that's the project.
This image really matches the tone of the room that we're in right now.
Yeah,
so you're on the
cozy.
inside of this room.
Yeah.
And it feels like right, guys. Oh, so you got Finn on the mic right now. So any questions, any images you guys want him to go back to, please let him know. Obviously, there's every render is fucking bomb. I always forget how many fucking top renders he has. So it's good to get a refreshment. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks. It was pretty positive in the chat. Very nice to see. 33 viewers. Cool.
yeah.
W Finn.
You should
W
read the
Finn.
one from the biology major. He says, Dawood says, as a biology major, this shit is amazing.
That's cool feedback to hear.
Alpha says, Finn's work is a true reflection of his passions. I believe that
Yeah.
to be very true.
Yeah, I mean, I do love horses. Like, I think that's the thing is, this year's maybe. So I look back at this project and I think, wow, I was kind of fucking about a bit. Like, there was research and it was a cool concept, but compared to the work I'm doing this year, it's like a lot more speculative and imaginative and these sorts of things. But I think it's important to do that because you start to find what you really like about space and about architecture, and this is like a little bit utopian way of thinking, but I've like this year, I mean, I'll probably do a portfolio review of my this year portfolio at some point, and you'll see how different it is in the sense that the research and the approach to research is a lot more in depth and detailed.
It's cool though that once you do, even if it's just like fucking around modeling and stuff for a while, and you do enough research about it, you actually understand what all this fucking around actually means, and they're not just fucking around anymore.
Yeah, right. It's like a balance between making things through like an intuitive process and like love of making, essentially, and then also keeping in mind and always trying to deepen your understanding of the subject matter that you're designing for. Um, and I think this project was really interesting as just a thought experiment of, and also just a broad critique, I think, of how we do developments within the urban landscape right now. I mean, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, and I'm not really saying that this should or could ever get built, but it's more just the project itself serves as a way of satirizing a little bit, but also questioning or challenging how we go about thinking about green space and housing and community within the world of like commercial profit driven developments. And this is almost the complete opposite of those, where there is no profit at the helm of the project, but instead it's an animal which has a very specific set of requirements and needs of pasture and space and of landscape. And it's kind of backing that up with the kind of theoretical side of how domestication involves both the horse and the human, and how both have changed to accommodate the other. This kind of leverages that in a way that would argue that by developing for the needs of horses, you're also developing for the needs of humans. Yeah. Yes, everything was done in Blender. Also interested in those Issuu comic drawings. Yeah, so that's essentially like the equivalent of Make 2D in Blender, so the grease pencil, and then I take it into Illustrator and like color it with like the live paint. It's kind of a labor intensive drawing process. So I would do a black and white render of the scene to get the shadows as a layer, and then get the line work, color the line work by hand, and then put the shadows on top of it. This is one of those moments where I see work and think how this man found or came up with the aesthetic, and to have this really cohesive research behind it. It's really inspiring stuff. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I didn't necessarily have this aesthetic before going into the project as well. It's actually really interesting, and this is maybe like, I think a lot of people have these sorts of questions. Like when we do portfolio reviews for people, we see like a lot of people kind of have a little bit of research, but the research is like, okay, sun, wind, and then they have a Frank Gehry style sketch, and then final cross-laminated timber building. And it's like, sometimes that's really successful, but for me, I really like starting with these sort of objects and thinking about the architecture from the object scale first, and then that developed into the room scale. So, I'm looking at a very specific like horse feeding basket, and then thinking about, okay, where is that attached to the wall? How do I sort of throughout the whole architecture at every scale and level of detail think about how I can somehow use the postures of horse riding as a tool for thinking about structure. So there's a lot of hanging and suspension, but also sort of ways of touching the architecture and ways of using the body in relationship to the architecture. These things start sort of fractally applying to the design from like an object scale to the room scale, and then like to a kind of small building scale. And it just sort of goes up and up and up, and you maintain these ways of thinking. I think that gives it builds a very like convincing language, I think.
Yeah, like in the first one, the horse straddle one, like that's like I was trying to talk to you.
Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah. That's true. So
Like I was just saying to Finn how like even just looking at the straddle drawing, which I think is the first thing that he did, even the black and the pencil drawing, I think.
yeah.
He started with the pencil drawing. I remember seeing it on like the first few days. It was like this, looking at even just the language of understanding a horse, understanding its skeleton, its skin, What are the devices that are used to contact this horse and to accommodate its body? For example, where does the straddle attach to the bone? Why does it attach there? How does it attach there? What shapes does it take? And then taking it into like 3D of like then understanding it more in rigorous 3D dimension accurate detail.
Yeah, because by sort of modeling and a little bit designing the stirrup and then the saddle as a starting point, what I'm really doing is building an understanding for what are the really key moments of technology and like architecture. Because the stirrup and the saddle are architectures in a way, and it's like what is the language of those, and why is the language of those such? Like what does that show us, or like how are these architectures imbued with a certain understanding or set of relationships between us and nature? And I'm using the horse as like the lens within which we can like understand a broader nature.
Yeah.
um
Like you're not coming up with a thing completely new. You're learning from existing things that already considers these animals and how we touch them.
yeah, exactly. And then this really immediately starts driving a set of like languages. Is this a final degree project? This was done last year, which is the first year of the master's. The master's is a 2-year course, so I'm currently doing a different project, which is my like final project. But this is like a final project in a sense. Like this has the same amount of weight or marks as my last year. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Blender last year. How do you start your research going so deep and not getting lost in the sauce? I mean, you have to get a little bit lost in the sauce. I think the process is you start with a topic, and the topic can be really, really simple. Like for me, it was just like I like horses, and then it's okay. Then you have the site, and the site has a specific set of conditions. It's being developed. It has. I mean, it was kind of coincidental and also key that the site had a specific cultural relationship to horses in the sense that there was a lot of conflict and class dispute that revolved around the horse being used as this mediating tool for the police. So in a way, the project was also kind of reclaiming the horse as a vehicle for community building as opposed to community.
That's really great.
So I wouldn't like there has to be a balance. Like you can't just do a project about whatever it is you want. You have to kind of have a set of responsibilities and relationships to a site. But it's just fascinating how it doesn't really matter what you pick. Anything you pick you can unpack to no end. Like you can like this year I started with fishing as like a practice and looked at fishing within Shetland, and it's just crazy how just looking at one thing can show you so much about the whole world. Everything exists as a microcosm.
Yeah, literally the sauce thing. It's like
2 years masters in Bartlett. Yeah.
I guess like you can't just start off and just.
Oh, sorry.
But like I feel like you probably have to. You have to build a foundation, and then I think Finn has already built that foundation so well that it's hard for him to get lost in the sauce. There's like.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you get lost, and then you have to. I think the interesting part about doing research is being able to take a bunch of stuff and draw it or sew it into a very like concise and specific gestural intention. So it's like there's all these different relationships with the horse, and it's like your building becomes your thesis or becomes your like your way of understanding all of these different things, and it kind of translates them into an action. Which is, I think, why architectural thinking is a really interesting way of approaching research, because other disciplines might do an essay or might do a piece of writing which contributes to like a further human understanding, but architecture, in a way, gives form to a lot of these concepts and ideas, and there's something really intuitive and immediately grasping about having a form which. Because I think we're all so used to being in spaces, and we all intuitively understand what a space means and does. And when you see a space which is kind of a piece of research and which exists as a kind of counterpoint to a traditional set of circumstances, then seeing that building manifested through the image and through the plan and through the drawing gives you a certain intuitive understanding of a set of conditions in the world.
Yeah, I think architecture is very cool because it's like in between science and art. And you have artists who model things like maybe the horse saddle for a 3D movie or like a game design, but they wouldn't have to consider science in it. And a scientist who models those a horse straddle, I don't know why they would do it, but if they do it, they won't consider the artistic of why it's like necessarily designed like that, or how do they make it, I don't know, look more comforting to the eyes. And like architecture kind of is in between those things. And
And also, I mean, architecture, at least for me, over the last 2 years in this master's degree, a lot of architecture is almost a sociological endeavor or thinking about philosophy or world making. Because I was talking to my friend about this the other day, but a lot of people, when they see work like this or work kind of experimental architectural academic projects, they have this knee jerk reaction of, why are you learning this? What, like a waste of time? You're just like messing about. And to a certain extent, I think it is true where academia is like a bit of a playground sometimes. But I was saying this to my friend. It's like anyone can basically build what's getting built already. Like the work I did in as a part one architectural assistant, I could have probably done when I was 16. You know, it just requires like a very basic level understand, like not even an advanced level of software knowledge. It's like you're just kind of copying stuff. You translate. It's quite repetitive work. So the point of the architectural education isn't to teach you how to be an architect, because that stuff's actually a lot easier than people think. I mean, again, in my experience, but what architectural education does, it offers you the chance to think about, well, why are we doing the things we're doing? Like, why? Obviously, we can build all these massive buildings, but should we be building them? And what should we actually be doing with our space and with our resources and with our, because I mean, space is fundamental to how we build a society. Everything happens within a space, and the space has an agency over the types of interactions that are happening. So it's really, really key. And obviously, I'm biased because I'm in this field, but it's really key to have a sort of understanding of how what we build affects our lives, and through having that understanding, you can start perhaps shifting or changing the world in a way that is a little bit more desirable and a little bit more fair and equitable, etc. Can I maybe give an overall rundown of the atmosphere in the renders? Like, technically, what are the main points that can be applied regardless of the program? Well, I don't know. I think in a lot of ways, here's my approach to renders, and this is like my bottom line for approaching the image when you're doing like architectural visualization. You can make like an ArcViz image, which is like your whatever you've made in nice lighting with people looking happy and they're enjoying themselves and it looks great. But again, I think the challenge for me is always looking at how a render can be somehow aspirational or tell a story, and how it's almost like I think of the image first and then the architecture, as opposed to having just an architectural model and then, okay, I'm just going to take a photo of it. Essentially, it's like I'm using the image in the same way that you would think of a painting, in the sense that when you're doing a painting, you're trying to like you kind of create the landscape in a way that evokes some sort of feeling or nostalgia or maybe hope. And in the same way, I think of like the composition of an image, and then the architecture becomes an ingredient within that image to evoke some deeper intention, which might not necessarily be the program. But so it's just about how you think about your architecture within the landscape of the image itself, which I think is like just a philosophy of approach to renders that I think, like with this image, for example, it's not necessarily about the building. It's about a set of circumstances within the city condition. I don't think this is like the best render I've ever done or whatever, but or even the last one. There's like a guy here drinking, and there's a horse here, and there's a house, and there's like a skyline, and all of these ingredients, you're sort of putting them together in order to let the viewer put together their own story, as opposed to like you as the visualizer saying, oh look, these are people enjoying themselves within the render. This is like a family walking their dog. Like I hate ArcViz people, like the people you see in renders. I hate them so much. And like I really like, if I'm putting people in the render, I put them I use the same approach that like an 18th century landscape painter does with people, where they exist, but they're part of the landscape and they're part of the process of the space, as opposed to they're just there inhabiting it. Are those saddle models? No, that's all digital. No final real models. Lost with the thesis, and now I'm at the point where I overthink my spaces and redo everything. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't overthink anything. The acid test for me is, do you like the space you've made? And if you don't like that, then it's like, well, that's always the fundamental thing. And then what you need on top of that is does it make sense within the context of the site, and then does it make sense within the context of what you're trying to do, given what you've learned through doing the research.
And it obviously doesn't happen overnight. It's like, it's not like I realize, oh, I don't like it, and then someone told me an advice, and overnight I'm gonna improve and start building amazing stuff. It's like a progress. Like each time, just give yourself small goals of like, what can I do improve on this time? And as long as you're hitting those goals, then eventually I think you'll get there.
And this is, and I don't know if this really applies all the time, but I think I was fortunate last year with this project and with the project I'm doing this year, where I set out the project in a way that there's lots of different buildings to design. So it means I can just do one in like half a week. I can spend like 3 or 4 days modeling a building and doing the render and being like, okay, I like some parts of this, I don't like other parts of it. And then you get to work on essentially like a fresh new building, and you kind of iterate across spaces instead of like redoing the same one over and over again. Because I think it's quite hard to do that and feel like enthusiastic about it, like modeling the same space over and over again, and changing it a lot. But then also, I don't think it's quite hard to pick out if you keep doing that. Well, what is it that worked about that and didn't work about it? Is there any recommendation? Oh, yeah. I think don't overthink things, but sometimes it's easy. It's I find it useful if you're stuck on anything, do something at a completely different scale to what you're working on at the moment. So if you're stuck trying to think about how the building looks overall, forget it for like a few days and do a very intimate moment type space or render or like a little detail. Wait, Kelvin, did you just mute me?
No, I just muted.
Oh, okay. Or if you're really stuck on like some interior thing, like think about the outside, or think about just about like a completely different moment of the building and work on that, because it's insane how thinking about just one part of the building gives you information about a completely different part of the design. And that's sort of what I mean. Like, I think when people talk about architectural language, people say that a lot, but what it really means is you build a set of words and a set of like understanding, and it at some point you become just fluent in the language that you're building, and at that point you can design anything. But it's important that you spend time on little details, coming up with your vocabulary and the types of phrases you want to use architecturally and the types of sentences, within your architectural language. And once you're fluent, once you can speak English, for example, you can say anything, but you need to be able to know the words and know the phrases and stuff.
Could you show them a little bit of like the kind of columns that you kind of start building? Because there's like instances where you can kind of see the same kind of columns, the same kind of windows, like languages that you've drawn, that so they can see specifically
so
what you
for this one, for example, I spent a lot of time just modeling this column right here, and which is the one on the right hand side. And I was sort of looking at the horse. It's like a little bit tacky, but through doing that, okay, I'm working out what type of material logic. I'm thinking about a formal logic. I'm thinking about how does this relate to the space which where it's located. So this is a stable, all of these things. But just by doing this, it's like, I sort of build a set of rules or a set of vocabularies that then I apply to the building much generally, and it becomes really easy to model the rest of it, but just by thinking about one thing. See you later, Ruben. Thank you, W. Is it the first time viewing it from that angle of the image as more than just a complementary part of architecture? It's kind of like a conceptual artist process. Yeah, exactly. It's like when I set up a render like this, I don't have the building. Like, I'll set up the camera before I have like a lot of this done. I'll have like maybe a very brief skeleton, but like Let me try and find a good example. Like if I was doing,
It's almost like you've seen so much good spaces that you trust your eyes to tell you what a good space will look like, and then you do the plan, which then makes sure that everything actually works afterwards. But you make a good space first.
yeah, like for this one, for example, I'm trying to think of a good one. It's hard to describe, but the whole parts of a building will emerge after I've already set up the camera and I'm halfway doing the render. It's like, oh, like fuck, this composition would look better with a bit of architecture over here, and then that's like a starting point, and then you actually flesh out that architecture. You're always working back and forth with like a logical approach, and then yeah. Does modeling in Blender have the same precision in Rhino? I don't know. It has a dimensions system, and there are a set of dimensions within Blender, but it's not built into how you make the model. So in Rhino, it's like you start with a two-dimensional sketch usually, or you start with a line which is defined, and then you use that to generate a three-dimensional form. Whereas in Blender, it's a lot more like you have a 3D thing, and you're always sort of manipulating it a little bit here and there. So for me, the mesh modeling system, as opposed to NURBS in Rhino, offers me this sort of more sculptural approach. And I mean sculptural in the sense that you can kind of add and subtract and be a bit more like tweaky with things. You can kind of tweak things always and always go back and change little bits. Whereas in Rhino, it seems a lot harder because you kind of the process isn't like all one thing. You kind of have these different steps to making a form. Yeah. So you're doing a child support center. Interesting. Yeah. Any other questions? I will happily take.
There's a lot before.
I can also show you some of the work from this year, and it's like a very different vibe and style.
Guys, W Finn, bro. He's giving you that fucking sauce. Don't drown, guys. Don't drown.
But like, you know, these are more the renders I've been working on for the last few weeks. And it's a completely different vibe and style. But again, like, if you look at these images, they invite you to think about what might be going on. Like, there is some people in this render, but it's not really the focus. It's more of like a side line. And like objects and these sorts of things within scenes, like what's going on here, starts telling a story, etc. Yeah.
You gotta make a sauce archive kind of thing where it's just filled with sauces.
Yeah, we should do like
We get actual sauce bottles and put render over the labels. Just have like a
we
cabinet
could
of
just render
sauce.
that as well instead of actually having to make it.
Yeah, breaking the eighth wall. Yeah. That would be dope. Like a sauce cabinet, and then it's just that's his IG page. It's true. That is Finn's IG page.
So this portfolio, the one I'm showing you now, is a lot more work in progress. Like a lot of these pages aren't finished, and they're just kind of there as placeholders. Like this is like a working document. But I think as advice for actual, my God, my whole mouse is gone. I can't see it. Okay, but as like a piece of advice for putting together a portfolio, and I think a lot of people struggle with this, really make it simple. Like this is my approach anyway. Like for example, I have 4 pages of like these renders, which are kind of research renders, and it's like just one thing on the page and a little bit of text and like justification on the left. You know, and if you have a very consistent approach, it makes it very easy to like this one. It's like 2 things on the page and they're always all linked, and sometimes pages will just be like a few images, but just keeping it very like just making a lot of sense.
We've got a good question, but like hypothetically, what is stopping this kind of architecture to be realized?
Well,
Interesting question.
a few things. Nothing technically is stopping it, but yeah, money. That's F1. Basically,
it's crazy though. Like it's like you can say this architecture makes money, But then you have to convince the person who owns the land that this makes the most money. It's not that it just has to make money; it has to make more money than any other architecture that can be on this land. So that becomes hard for me, just off instinct.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about a building that gets built today, it it fundamentally relies on people paying for it, and and I'd not to get too like socialist headed, but like if you have a system where the government plans all these things, which I'm not saying is like the most ideal thing necessarily, but when in a capitalist system we rely on like free market investment into public space, it means our public space is always going to be built for the sole purpose of producing profit for those people who invested in it. And sometimes people see it fit that a good design makes a space more profitable. But I mean, what good means within that context is up for debate. Because, like, if you look at, for example, the Manchester Stadium we were looking at earlier today, there's a lot of parts of that which are like on paper good, like lots of public space, green space, community stuff, but there's something uncanny about it, and I don't know if anyone's really arguing that it's good because it's so obvious and like intuitive that these things are really corporate, really stale, and really like hard to relate to, and that they're all shops. It's all, it's not very generous as space. So that's why it's just who's paying for it, who's paying for good design.
We're just so used to it. Like we have Norman Foster telling us that this is might be the largest open space in the world, right, or something. And they were just looking at a Nike store that's covered by some kind of stuff, and it's like this is the nicest, biggest open public space that you should love. And I don't know. Versus looking at like Finn's renders or like a medieval forest, I guess. Like I mean, we just kind of accept it, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, architecture is always going to be like a talisman for the society that builds it. It will always be like a representation of the types of systems that put it in place. So I mean, if you look at like fascist architecture, it's really grand and really like massive, but that's because the force that was in place making it has those sorts of ideals, these really kind of like I don't know, power hungry displays of power, these sorts of things. Or if you look at societies that had like the build the pyramids, that's all built on like slave labor. I mean, I know that's contested, but a lot of these things always require some sort of condition in order to generate the architecture. So that's I think also why I typically gravitate towards smaller buildings. Those are the ones I like a lot more, because if I look at the types of societies I would like to live in, those are ones that typically will inhabit and build very like modest, small dwellings. And it's not that I don't like big buildings visually or architecturally. It's just that I don't really like what that entails about the type of civilization that builds them. You know what I mean? How to stand out to win prizes like the President's Medal or become one of the top students when it's just so saturated with talents at the Bartlett. First of all,
if you try, you already lose.
Yeah, it's like this is like trying to be cool. The thing is, it's like you could optimize your project for the President's Medal, and that would probably just mean doing something really sustainable, really socially in touch, really like there are probably boxes that will make you more likely, but it's not. Don't aim for the President's Medal. The President's Medal is just like, does a certain 6 people like your project or whatever, however many people are on that panel. It's not about like an objective measure of your project. It's just, do these people here like your project? And honestly, if you think like that, you're going to make a lot worse work, because you're not trying to think through your own eye. You're thinking through the eyes of other people, and you just see worse through the eyes of other people. Yeah. It's about return on investment specific. Yeah, do you guys need to structurally resolve your designs? Yes, we do, sort of. I mean, parts of them need to be like, typically a lot of the master's projects are quite big in scale. Like they'll be almost master plan scale developments a lot of the time. So you'll need to have at least some of it structurally resolved. But I think it's expected that there's a lot of architecture which isn't necessarily all going to be resolved to the same detail.
And I think like, I mean, of course, sometimes it's like nice to have big project because like some people just like big projects, and like I like big projects, but I think I it's not it's not that the big projects are all just to look grand and have crazy big renders. Because last year I really wanted to do a small hut just in my backyard and just build a little house or something, but then I was pushed to do a master plan. I think it's because maybe it's part of our master's like rubric thing where you have to have both um, understanding of a building but also understanding of urban planning to a certain extent, that you have to understand the context, like much wider context, and how to learn how master plans work. So yeah, that's just what I remember.
Does the field of architecture itself, like isolated from anything else, take a bit of blame for it? Um, does architecture as a field take blame for making those sorts of buildings? Um, yeah, but I don't think you can ever like I don't know if it's just where I'm at the moment in my head, but it seems like you basically can't separate any processes within the world from anything else. Like almost nothing exists outside of our processes of like extraction and growth and profit. Which I know is just like maybe because I'm in an academic setting right now and I'm reading a lot about these things. You kind of see the whole world through that lens. But yeah, the architecture as an industry exists within the structure of capital. Like education right now exists within a financial capitalist structure. So the kind of people and buildings that the education system optimizes for is always going to be fundamentally, on some level, profit driven ish, you know. Because like if you think about why are people doing, a lot of people go to university because they want a specific job, and the good jobs are all the ones that do these types of buildings. So they're going to try and do projects that, you know, that optimize for getting into those sorts of firms, these sorts of things. So there's like, I don't know if it's about a system of, I don't think we have to blame anything or anyone on these things. It's more that it's important that we have an understanding of why the thing, because it's not like profit is inherently evil. It's kind of neutral ethically. It's just it just doesn't have a consideration for ethics at all. It's not like an evil thing. It just has no moral awareness. Like companies should never ever be expected to be moral. And I wish people had that understanding that they aren't moral entities or human entities, and they must be regulated because we can't ever expect them to act out of good faith because all they do is make profit. And it's like asking a dog to meow. It just doesn't. It only barks. So a company will always try and make money, and we're never going to change that about them. So it's better that we just have that understanding and look to other things for instead of profit, for like guiding our morals and our values. Because profit is like an important tool for being efficient, and it like distributes like an understand like capitalism is essentially a computer which computes what do people need and who can like fill those needs. Like supply and demand essentially is a computational device, so we kind of need it in order to like function at the level that we do. But we shouldn't look to it as like a guide for our values or our morals.
Yeah, I feel like what we do here in terms of what we can take from what we do at school into the future is in a way very restricted, and in a way like, am I gonna I mean, is Finn gonna be able to build this kind of stuff in real life? Probably not in the short term future, but what it does is that by talking to you guys and stuff, like it puts an idea in people's mind, and that's enough. And like, even if more people start doing these kind of renders slowly over the course of a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, you know, it's doing something, and that's not that. I mean, I see that as a great win for everyone. Like that's kind of why I I do streams, because I feel like it's even just fun to just have a little conversation over these silly things, which, people have arguments on Instagram about, which I also think is healthy as well. So that's why I respond to comments sometimes, because I think it's valuable to even just talk about these things.
Yeah, I mean, there's so yeah, F1 makes a good point that it's never even just architects. Like everything, you can't separate the process of making a building from the people who make it. And then what other questions? Do you guys think very abstract experimental student work dissociates someone from the industry, or does it expose you to a wider spectrum of what can be done in order to maximize what you have to do? Let me just think about that question. Does it expose you to a wider spectrum of what can be done? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the real answer to that is kind of the sad one, which is like people have all these cool ideas at uni and then they go into practice and they forget, they don't ever apply them. I think it's still good that people understand these things, and it's much better that more people within the population have the tools to think critically and to think in the way that education allows you to think. But the sad truth is people need to like make a living at some point, and you will end up just joining a company. Most people, like unless you somehow find yourself in a very like specific set of circumstances, you'll almost always end up working for a company and technically going against a lot of the things or values that you set out in your design projects at university.
Yeah.
But that's not like because you're a bad person. It's like everyone has to somehow engage in the system. You can't really escape it. But I think what's more important is that people go through education. I just think education, you can't ever have enough of it, because more people who have like an ability to think critically and to be sort of more skeptical, but in an educated way about society. So not skepticism, the type of skepticism that like conspiracy theorists will have, because it's not very productive. Because what's funny about that is that there's some really real thinking or some real issues that conspiracy theorist people are latching onto, but they always end up trying to blame some person or some group of people, and that gets really like quite volatile, socially speaking. Where what's more important, I think what I've learned, is that it's almost like there's no one who's leading this thing. There's no one sailing the ship. It's just that the ship is going, and it's kind of like a false assumption that the system we live in has like a very sophisticated intention. It doesn't. It's a very simple direction we're moving in, and it's growth and profit. And it's not like anyone's actually doing that themselves. There's no one driving it. It's just that's the way things are. And it's better that we have an understanding of that in order that we might think about how we can. And here we go, Ludwig. Several official government agents are currently searching for me. Therefore, my family. Families are unsafe. Wrong there, and families is also wrong, with the apostrophe.
People love blood.
Yeah, Matthew makes a good point. I don't think most projects here are that abstract or experimental than people make it out to be. Yeah, that's true. I think there are a lot of quite normal projects here too.
The visual just leads you to think that.
There's a lot of impressive visuals, but some
the portfolios are very.
The vast majority of projects are like, solid like, architectural, fundamental, good projects. But like, it always seems to be that this school celebrates the ones that are a bit more like subversive or challenging or weird.
Mm-hmm. And like, I guess if you really be critical about a problem, like it's a problem big like that, it cannot be solved in a realistic way and building some kind of small thing. You're almost just literally putting an idea out there, because there's only a year that you get to do a project. What else can you do than just put a few visuals out there that makes people think about something weird? You can't actually design a building that solves the issue. That's not possible in a year.
Yeah, true.
It's almost not worth trying to do that.
Does the Bartlett cover genocide / manslaughter? No, it doesn't.
Does the Bartlett cover socioeconomics aspects of architecture?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what unit you're in, but yeah, there's a lot of social, political thinking around architecture. I think maybe more so than other universities. Maybe, I don't know, but like, especially the unit we're in this year seems to be highly focused on like social issues, but in quite an interesting or unique way. Because it seems like some projects can have a really good intention and a good understanding of a social condition, but then the solution is like, wow, look at this imaginative utopia that's different. You know, like
Yeah.
they'll say like, look at this building project which exists in a time when everyone's a farmer
Yeah.
with like 6 cows and they all care for the landscape. It's like, okay, people don't. This is never going to happen, and people
Yeah.
will never do this. So it seems like the approach of this unit is more. How are people in the world already trying to solve their own problems? So it takes the responsibility away from the architect, and the ego away from the project, where it's not up to us as designers to think of the solutions themselves to projects. It's more to like give space to the existing practices and modes of worlding that are already emergent within the fabric of the problem. Damn, we don't have any of that at my uni. Yeah, I think that, but this also might be a master's thing. I think at undergraduate levels as well, a lot of the focus should be just on the basic skills, like can you model, can you draw, can you think, can you like write. But then at the master's level, it's kind of synthesizing all of these. Agreed. Over where I'm studying, the curriculum does not really allow you to explore conceptual designs, as in it just prepares you on what you'll most likely be doing in the future. Yeah, I mean, and the thing is like that's fine, and I think that's good that there are people, like there are spaces to learn these skills, and I mean we had that in undergrad as well. Like we had to learn how to 3D model and draw and all these things, but I don't know. It seems like, especially with the technology that we have and the tools that we have, I really think most people without an architecture degree could do the job that someone in practice in architecture does, more or less. As like it would be much more beneficial to just work in an architecture practice for 2 or 3 years, and you'd be much better prepared than someone who's done an undergraduate degree.
That's
Probably,
true. Yeah.
You know, do you draw inspiration and or base your architectural style completely drive through an artist style like Zaha Hadid? No, I mean that was kind of a zeitgeist of like the 90s, early 2000s, of this like kind of aspirational culture we had, where wow, it was kind of before the resource, I mean not completely, but before the like climate and resource awareness was really there. Hold on. 1 second.
They seem important. We got cookies. Oh,
Thank you.
No, we're good. We're good.
they're sandwiches.
Wait, is it gluten?
Are they? That's unappreciative. You should have come here.
I think that's postmodernist, right, Zaha? So it was reacting to the blocky shit that they were doing.
Yeah, but
it's just like fuck it. Yeah.
The Zaha stuff is just very like formally expressive.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really care that much about resource or like being conserving or sustainable. It's just like look at what we can do, and it's quite utopian. But what's funny is that like if you look at how our media has then started to portray dystopia, it kind of adopts all of the architectural languages, which were once utopian, because they kind of act as a counterpoint to our current set of circumstances, which are really hinged upon scarcity of resource. And yeah,
that's true. Thank you guys.
We actually meant to be here for you, not against you.
Zaha was good as a student, but her projects are kind of overrated. I mean, well, obviously she was a god of her time. Imagine seeing that thing built for the very first time, but now it's overdone in every architecture competition. It's cool, but comes at a cost that we can't really afford right now. I mean, it's like the world is never, I don't know, to me, the world never really gets that good, never really gets that bad. It's always going to be pretty mid. And so I'm not trying to solve the world. I'm just seeing, so the reason why I do what I do is because I don't see a lot of people doing it. And that's pretty much the only reason. I'm just trying to do things that I think are not done as much. I'm not trying to say everyone should think the way I do. Everyone should stream. Everyone should focus on projects. I'm just doing it because most people do it on other things. So I'm just filling in that gap that I find interesting. I think it's never going to be all one side. It's just a little bit of balance from both things. Like concrete block architecture and a bit more of other stuff architecture. So I think Zaha was filling in that gap from modernism, and then too much of that became postmodernist. So now we're kind of going back to the modernists, and I'm going back again. What are you looking at? Oh, this is Finn's portfolio.
How do you decide on a topic worth spending a year focusing on? That's like an interesting.
Everything's worth.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is basically it doesn't matter what you start with, you'll be able to find a way to make that a key or relevant thing to look at.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most important thing is that you find it interesting, because otherwise you won't actually be engaged with what the work you're doing. So as long as you find it interesting, you can make anything into a valid piece of research, more or less. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's usually the site will tell you what you should be researching as well. Like if you have a site within the brief, then that'll probably tell you how to approach the research.
Like even when I build a shed, I think that's very worth 1 year of things. If you really spent a year just building a really perfect shed, I know people will think, oh, he won't like it because he likes weird looking buildings, but that's actually what I tried to do last year. I just got pushed to do more weird stuff because I think part of the rubric is to design a master plan and to kind of be more experimental because I'm at the bar of it. But yeah, I think building a shed for a year is just as valid. It just has to be a very cool shed. Like doesn't have to look insane, but it should just be really well done, really detailed, really resolved. We can always improve upon sheds, even if we already have sheds. So yeah, I think everything is worthy of more exploration. Just don't repeat the same thing and actually just put in time and effort. And if you put in time and effort, I'm sure that you will discover things that people haven't discovered. Yeah, that's what I think.
Any other good questions from chat?
Hi, chat.
What are we looking at? We're looking at Finn's portfolio from last year.
Para L.
They can't hear it.
Who's
that?
He's being a hater to us. Yep.
Please, could you both do a tutorial on how to integrate nitroglycerin into steel beams, specifically Children's Hospital Foundation steel beams? What the fuck is nitroglycerin? Is it like does it rot them?
It probably damages the structural integrity of the steel beams.
Incorporated.
I don't know if we can ethically do a tutorial on how to structurally damage a children's hospital.
No, that's just steel beams.
Yeah, drinking that coffee.
Wait, is there more chat that I can't see?
No, it's just Ludwig sending.
Oh, yeah.
Are you doing portfolio reviews today? Thinking of presenting mine?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I've been waiting all day for this.
Yeah, we'll be here for another couple hours.
Hayden, W emoji. Yeah, lots of people were saying you should be a tutor, Finn. Finn,
I'd like to be. I would like to teach, but it's not very profitable.
Yeah, that's the problem. We could be internet tutors, though. It's also not very profitable so far.
Well,
just
I
kidding.
mean, it's picking up.
It's popping though. It's popping today.
I'll do. If people want to pay me for tutorials one-on-one, I'm happy to do that. But what do you guys think of permanence of architecture? Is it worth building for permanence when in reality it's going to go away in a few more years? I don't know. I know Jonathan Hill has done a lot of writing on the architecture of ruins, so it might be worth looking at if you're really interested in that. Like looking at some of the theory about ruin and about sort of heritage, like critical heritage studies, are super interesting. I did quite a lot of reading last year on critical heritage studies and thinking about how we deal with like old buildings and the practices of conservation, and are they necessarily like what we do now is kind of like we look at things that are old and we kind of lock them and we say, okay, this is now sort of listed or category 1, you can't change this. But sort of a critical heritage studies approach would sort of say that there's maybe a problem in that, where by doing so you kind of remove it from its process of being, and you kind of strip away a lot of the potential for reuse and like sort of reintegration into sort of ways of living. Nitroglycerin is highly explosive, says Ludwig. Is parametric overlooked upon now after Zaha Hadid got into the modernist in a time where in it was a legend, and now it's just so easy to because yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think parametricism took off a lot with Zaha because it was new and it was very different, and it kind of epitomized, or like it reflected a lot of the optimism of the 90s/early 2000s. But I think now parametricism seems to be at odds with a lot of the conversations that are going on within architecture and within, I mean, politics and stuff as a whole, where the zeitgeist seems to be all about responsibility to the climate and to resource and to people, and it seems like the parametric design is kind of needlessly resource intensive and kind of at odds with the sort of situated needs of people. Like I'm really not a fan of parametric architecture because it seems like a little bit unhuman to me. I mean, but like I don't think it's all bad. It's just it's not how I like to design. But that's just me. Jonathan Hill's the GOAT. Yeah, true. Is teaching uni applicants more profitable than teaching uni students? I have no idea. I don't do either. I don't think teaching uni students is super profitable from what I hear. If reconfiguring a city's subterranean sewage system/utilities is an act of terrorism, then I suppose I'm indeed. Okay, great. Ludwig swimming in sauce. Yeah, Ludwig spitting facts. And by reconfiguring, I mean targeting orphanages and children's hospitals, neglecting structural integrity of their foundations during chamber construction. I mean, that's an interesting ethical question you raise. I mean, when does building become essentially, a terrorist act? And I suppose it's when you start targeting orphanages to intentionally lower the structural integrity. Ludwig should be an architect. I think Ludwig's already a sort of architect. From what I know about Ludwig, he has been constructing his own series of subterranean lower ground chambers, which, I mean, if that doesn't make you an architect, then I don't know what does. Because, I mean, subterranean thinking must be pretty difficult. It requires a pretty intensive... Yeah, exactly. Will parametricism ever be integrated with humanistic designs? It's just a tool after all. I don't know. It's funny because like parametric could mean a lot of different things. Like you could parametric just means that you have parameters which drive form. And it could be that your parameters are like environmental conditions or resource things. Like you could hypothetically set up a grasshopper script which reads how much stuff is being mined right now and how many trees are growing, and uses all of those things to like generate architectural forms which somehow are driven by resource needs. But I think when people talk about parametricism, they just mean the big swoopy, like massive steel things. So I think if you wanted parametrism to be integrated into like current human design, then you'd need to change what the parameters you're designing with are, instead of just being arbitrary numbers. How do you manage your time? Because most of the things people do in a particular time frame, I tend to take a long time doing the same thing. The most important thing for me is having a very clear intention with your work. Like if I don't know what I'm going to be working on, I'll sometimes just go home, because like there's no point just doing nothing, like, or just doing something but you don't know what you're even trying to do. But this is a skill you build as you get more fluent in thinking and more like critical, because you start knowing what it is you're like trying to say with your project, instead of just like trying to like fiddle with forms and not have anything driving it. So yeah, I think just make sure you go into any working day with like a clear set of goals. And if you're working on a render, for example, it's like, okay, I want this render to show a relationship between this industrial condition and then this domestic condition within the site. It's like, that's what the point of the render is. And then it's like, okay, if I want to do that, I need to do this, 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 and this, and I need to model this, and I need to model that. Like, it becomes a lot easier for you to work when you know what you're doing. Yeah. Ludwig has several degrees, one being chemical abuse and the other being mental illness. I wonder what university you got that from, Ludwig. That's an interesting curriculum. The mental illness. Is that a bachelor's or a master's? Or maybe even a PhD? Yeah, zeitgeist is like the current social trend or condition, or like what's being discussed right now. The official definition is the defining spirit or mood of a particular period. Any other architectural questions or non-architectural questions, or perhaps questions related to nitroglycerin? Do you get enough rest during doing what you love? No, not right now. I'm exhausted right now, but I'm also going through deep emotional turmoil.
Yeah, it's
I think you can definitely have a healthy balance. It's really work smart, not hard. Like I'm kind of using work right now as like a way to distract myself from other things. So I don't have a very healthy relationship with work. But a lot of people, like, we're the only two here, and like that's because we're also doing the stream, and the stream's fun. So,
what made people say Ludwig is spitting facts?
I don't know. I think it was when he was talking about destroying children's hospitals. I mean, I don't know ever if people mean Ludwig saying facts or if it's what we're saying on stream. 36 people watching.
Jesus.
That's a new high.
Yeah. 36 is new
Ludwig
high.
has several degrees. Oh no, I already read that. Ludwig manages his time through the Pattersons. Oh yeah. Due to the lack of sunlight entering my subterranean space, I used loud banging noises coming from the Pattersons to indicate nighttime. That's interesting. So that's actually quite a situated form of practice. You know, you're really, have an awareness of the rhythms of your.
That's not. It's like a. I guess it is artificial. Is it artificial? It's
well, I mean, that doesn't matter.
I guess it is.
It's sort of letting the city do what it does. Loud banging noises and moaning. Yeah, interesting. Would you sacrifice your grades if you disagree with your tutor in order to do what you want? This is like a.
Oh, this is a.
I don't know. I mean,
that is hard.
I don't know. Usually, you should listen to your tutors, I would say. And if you really, really don't agree with them, then try and find some other resource within the university. Like there will always be people who you can go to, hopefully, who you can talk to, like your year heads or whatever. Like there will be systems in place for this sort of issue if you really don't agree with your tutors. But a lot of the time, I've seen students, especially at undergrad, and I was the same, where you like your tutors say something, you're like, I'm not doing that. That's so stupid. And then a few years later, you'll be thinking about a project and you'll do research and you're like, fuck, my tutor was right.
Yeah.
Like they know more than you almost always. So I would always lean towards listening to them and engaging with it, and then deciding what to do. Because you are also here to learn. You're kind of paying for their expertise.
And like I just try to like actually talk to them, prepare a conversation about the points you want to bring to them. Make sure that they're not just about your feelings of how you think something should be or how you feel about something, but reference other people, other schools and other projects that they it's hard for them to refute, you know, actual real life precedents of what kind of things you want to do. And then I doubt they will like just be like, fuck you can't do it. They'll probably reason with you a little bit, and then they might say, oh, the school actually requires us to do this or that, or the region needs us to do this and that, which this is something you can't argue about. Then I would say the best thing is to find ways that fits both your agenda somewhere like in between. Because yeah, they know a lot and they can definitely teach you things that you can't learn yourself, and it's better to, unless you have someone online that's seen your stuff, knows what you're doing, that actually says that you are actually, yeah, you are learning stuff, then I wouldn't just completely trust yourself because you're probably young and don't have the experience that most people.
F1, I think you can email Kelvin, right, for your portfolio thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think we can do it now as
If
well.
you look in the description, there's a just email it to my email, and then I'll send you a Teams meeting link, and then we can hop on and then do the review.
The Fashion
I'm happy to
Institute
do it now.
I'm working on, when I get to a point of turmoil, can I please get your time so as to how to make it better?
Of course, don't wait till turmoil though.
Because I went to my tutor and the person told me to do civil engineering, not architecture, and that just frustrates me. There is not integration of art into our curriculum. I would say that, well, yeah, I don't know. We're always happy looking at stuff.
Wait, I'm confused. Wait, so you went to the tutors and the person, and because you went to my tutors and the person told me to do civil engineering and architecture, and that just frustrates me. As in, someone suggests that you do civil engineering instead of architecture because there is art and you. You walked into that. But isn't art more architecture and civil engineering is less art, right?
I think
Or
the thing is, architecture can be a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different approaches, which are all valid. Like some people like celebrating structural beauty in architecture, and they like just like making architectural a structural endeavor. But she told me to arrange boxes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And make classroom floor. I mean, sometimes for like I don't know because I've been quite lucky with my tutors, but sometimes you'll have tutors who are just really limited with what they think architecture should or could be, and I think that's a bad thing. It's like a really sad thing. I don't know. I it's hard to say. Like I don't want to tell you to like go against your tutors usually, because it's your degree and you don't want to like forego that. But like, why are they telling you to arrange boxes? Like, we're happy to look at your stuff if you want to come on at some point, because it might be that your tutor has like a very valid like concern of, oh well,
yeah,
you might need to have something fundamental in place.
Yeah.
Like an adjacency understanding.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, I do understand sometimes a tutor can be limiting, but
Yeah.
usually they're just trying to make sure they're filling in all the gaps so that you're not jumping to conclusions that might be wrong, but it's like you're going through the process of designing things in a logical and proper way.
Yeah, I used to think massing was useless, but now I think massing is helpful. You know, you need to have, I mean, just because the massing name sounds so boring, but like massing, and I think when you think about massing, it becomes like 5 boxes arranged. But really, massing can be so much more things. It could be all of the circulations, every single table in those boxes. All of those things are really massing. Massing is just, yeah, and that's kind of what, when you get to a certain level of massing, it becomes just design. It's like massing is just understanding I think the minimal space and the minimal requirements for everything so that you can start building from that foundation. So I think your tutor is probably right. You know, if she thinks you need to just do boxes, it's probably because you haven't done boxes, and you always need to start with. It doesn't always need to 100% like start with boxes, but you can't go far. Like you can't go do what Finn does unless you know what spaces you do, or unless you've done massing like 100 times. So I think you probably should start with boxes and then ask her about other ideas that you have on top of there.
The whole building is trusses and no columns. That's interesting. Yeah, maybe that's a good reference. I mean, when you say your tutor's asking you to do boxes, do you mean like actually to they don't want you to break outside of a rectangular form, or that they just want you to use
Or to start
like a
with
diagrammatic
boxes.
box? I don't know. I mean,
Right, yeah. I don't know.
yeah, just wait. To which one?
Yep.
Well, I mean, look, if they really insist on that, there are a lot of cool rectangular
Yeah.
buildings. You look at anything Ben Folks has done, and and that's an incredible. And that's not a diss, like and Ben
That
didn't used to be a
face.
rectangular guy, but now he is. He's like a big like rectangle enjoyer, and honestly, I think his work is. I mean, it's always improving. It's really, really good. So rectangles can be good. And also, you should. I mean, I don't know, Charant, what year are you in?
Doing it for like 3 years now. 3 year.
Ludwig says, Charant, your problems are your own. The moment you realize this, you may come and join me in my subterranean playground. I wouldn't listen to Ludwig, Charant. 3rd year. Okay, that's a bit annoying. How many years do you have in undergrad? Is it just 3, or do you have another year after this? Check out Kelvin's box fights.
Yeah. I box a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool rectangular buildings.
He's talking about my Fortnite.
What, Ludwig? A recurring dream of my retracted lower extremity growing internally out of me. If this happened, I would be extremely sad, as the storage capabilities have been incredibly useful. So, for those of you who don't know, I think Ludwig's penis is growing inside out, so he has like a hole instead of a thing, and he puts things in there,
Yeah,
like
storage.
ovarian stew or whatever. I don't know. 2 more years in undergrad. Oh, so you've got time. Look. If this is not your final year or whatever, just do a box and do it really, really well. Or do a box now, and then a few weeks from now, change it a bit and make it. But like, you kind of have, with some tutors, you have to walk before you can run, and you kind of have to prove to them that you know how to do the basics. But I know how frustrating it is. I mean, but also, I would say, if you really, really don't want to do something rectangular, then you have to do the other thing really well. You have to be able to bring something to your tutors that proves to them that what you're doing is also as valid as what they want to do. But like, I know that you showed us some of your like fabric experiments and stuff in Blender. Like, look, even this space, right? This is the one on screen. This is like all rectangular basically, but it's not normal or basic by any standard, Like, a lot of the things I'm doing this year are quite rectangular. Like, this one's a rectangular, but it's just got a rounded edge. And again, this is kind of like a shed. Like, even, if you forget what's on the right-hand side of this image, but this is all quite rectangular stuff. This is all very rectangular, but it's very nicely detailed. I mean, it's my work, so I don't want to suck my own.
It's really nicely detailed.
Thanks, Kelvin. But, you can do quite a lot with rectangles. Yeah. Bye, Ludwig. Child needs life support removed. Okay. Well, we'll be sending our prayers and love to the family of all the children.
Yes.
Stay at the orphanage.
Take care, Ludwig.
Is your Axel from Blender, Finn? Yes, it is, Michaela. All my stuff is from Blender.
Except for the plan.
No, even the plan is from Blender. To Finn, what kind of architecture do you believe in? Is there an idea that you've been thinking about for a while? I mean, me and Kelvin were talking about this earlier, but I sort of like, the more I think about it, the more I like smaller buildings. And yeah, quite situated, like small scale things typically, because I just don't think there's any way that you can build a huge building and it not be somehow contrary to an intention of social cohesion.
Yeah.
I don't know. 5 booms for Ludwig's child. Moving forward, don't firms require Rhino? Yeah, I would learn Rhino. I mean, I know Rhino as well. Not very well anymore, but I used to do. I could get away with Rhino. So
Yeah, I think Rhino's more beginner friendly than Blender.
I don't know. You can do Rhino.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys remember my project last year, but that was about like setting up a architecture practice or a factory or a manufacturer for housing that allows people to build their own stuff, because that's kind of what I was looking into last year, of like not designing for other people and designing as like a way of I guess arranging how people live and controlling people. So I think my goal is to have enough subs and viewers, and we can gather enough fund to just design a shed together. I think that would be really cool. Have you presented that on stream? I have not. And I'd be kind of embarrassed to be honest, because it's I don't want Finn to mog me like that, like straight after.
Kelvin, you should present your project you did present your project from last year though on YouTube.
I presented it as a crypt, which was 5 weeks into the project.
Oh, did you not do like a final video on it?
No.
You should, I think. No.
Yeah, I mean, I should. Yeah, I could do it. I'm happy to do it, but unless, I mean, but I don't know if should I just do it now?
If you want.
I've not seen your stuff more often, like the last project, which I binged.
F1 stuff.
F1, yeah, F1. Where's F1? I don't know. I just sent my portfolio for you for the live review. Okay. All right, guys. So should we do F1's review and then I can present or something? I don't know. It doesn't have to be.
That'd be a nice way to cap off the evening.
Yeah.
Just quickly, Finn, are you referring to the lack of human scale, which doesn't allow for people to feel comfortable? It's more like that's a part of it, but for me, it's like if you look at what's required socially and like economically to build a huge building, these things are always spawned out of a sort of very profit-driven, like monumental, like desire to. It's quite egotistical, where the types of spaces where you see people really coming together and like trying to make a different reality. I mean, we've said this a few times now, and this isn't our own analogy. This is, I think, Federico Campagna's thing. Yeah, I'll leave that. But the metaphor our tutors have told us this year is the current system that we live in, which is highly growth-centered, extraction-centered, all these things. A lot of people feel quite out of tune in their day-to-day lives. They don't feel like they're really situated, or they're not super embedded within that system in a way that they feel happy or fulfilled. So what some people do, and the argument that our tutors make, is that these things are already happening always. Is that the solutions to a lot of these people feeling out of tune is that they will find spaces where they feel more in tune, and they'll gradually start singing their own song within the melody.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, this is like, I'm kind of butchering this analogy, but they say that the job of us as architects and designers is to find, through very specific and good research, is to find how people are using space in a way that allows them to express a way of life that they feel more in tune with.
Mm-hmm.
And as architects, you kind of build space, you kind of augment that through like really good spatial design. So you start giving more space to those sorts of practices. Yeah, you enhance
their practices. Because like it's like you are never the person that experiences that problem the most. There's probably people that experience that problem way closer. You know, whatever you're studying, whether it's a fashion school or, you know, unless I'm designing an architect's studio space, I'm not going to be the person that knows that space the best. If I'm designing a fashion school, the fashion students will know that space better than me. If I'm designing for example, like Finn's designing a fisherman's hut, like a port, then fishermen will know that space better than him. So what are practices that's already done by those people closest to the design? Because they will, because the theory is that if you research enough, there will be things already happening, and you should never propose something that's completely new. You should always follow what's already been done, like the rhythm that
it's also nice for you, because it's like you don't have to think of everything. You just have to like trust that the people who you're designing for know what's best for them, you know, and you just really give space to that and give form to that. And anyway, well, how this relates to like the kind of big building thing is that it just seems like through doing this type of research that a lot of these spaces tend to be a lot smaller and a lot more kind of traditional. Like I say traditional with like heavy quotation marks, but you know, the types of spaces that were associated with like a way of living that was a lot more fulfilling are usually smaller spaces that are a lot more just very basic shelter, gathering, very normal things. Whereas if you look at big buildings, it's almost always like some commercial shopping center or mall or these sorts of things, and it's hard to feel like you're in tune with that.
W